Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 85. I'm Igneous, and today, if you're ready for us to start building a new ship, then that's exactly what we're going to be doing. Before we get started talking too much about the ship, however, this was a great opportunity to show in a little bit of detail how I start building ships where I want the cockpit to be elevated in the hull. And I've seen people asking in the past how to make this happen. You really got two options. You can build the ship starting with the core assembly wherever it happens to be convenient to place it, and then when you need to start building underneath it, you would have the generator and the power and all the other things and the thrusters to lift it up, prop it up, and then build underneath it and repeat as necessary until you've got things where you want them. The other alternative is what I like to do, which is build a platform way up in the air, and then you place your core assembly on that, and then that ends up being, because you chose to build the platform to the height that you want the core to be at, that's where it's going to be in the finished ship. Now, that's not to say it has to be that. If you change your mind later, there's nothing saying that you can't modify it, but to get you started, that's how I do it. And then following up with that, very important, is we want to build down to the ground. And get some landing gears underneath this thing just for a little bit of extra stability. You can see I replace all the steel blocks with combat steel. That's not necessary for this method of putting your cockpit up high, but it's just what I was doing at the time. Build down and then put a landing gear, and then you can see we're going to extend it a little bit forward as well and put another landing gear underneath. Now this isn't particularly stable because you can see both landing gears are in a straight line, but at least it gives us a little bit of leeway in terms of things tipping this way or that. The whole idea here is that there's a glitch with the physics engine, and my sense, my assumption, and I want to be very clear that this is just my assumption based on what I've seen, is that it comes from having ordinary blocks of a ship in contact with other things, and that's really all it is. So it could be ordinary blocks on your ship touching the ground. It could be ordinary blocks on your ship touching base blocks like we see here. Point being, you've got contact with things that the ship isn't attached to structurally, and the game decides at some point that this thing should be forcibly thrown away from each other, like there was a collision or something and we need to react, which of course is rarely the case because it usually starts with a stationary thing that you're building and it ends up getting flung way off into the air with no collision or anything like that that warrants it. It's just something that has happened to me quite frequently, and the way that I try and deal with it is by making sure that we build in as much stability to the ground as we can and then just be aware of it. But this time around, I decided also that we would build everything that we need onto this ship so that we could relocate it if it does get thrown. And that involves fuel tanks, generator, RCS unit, thrusters for every axis, and then, as you can see now, a way to actually get to the cockpit. So we built some elevators in place, we'll put the generator back, we'll put the RCS unit back, and we can carry on. I built the platform with the nerd pole method, which is basically you jump up in the air and you're facing down and you place a couple of blocks and then you land on them and then you jump again and then you place a couple of blocks and you go all the way up. The only problem with that is it tends to be a one-way journey to the top, and then if you want to get back again, you have to build another nerd pole or, as you see here, an elevator, put some fuel in the tanks, and then we'll just do a quick test with it so that at this time I could see, and also you can see, that we can raise the ship up, we can move it side to side, we can relocate it, it's working, we've got enough thrust at this point. By the time we have enough mass that the maneuvering thrusters aren't enough to help us move it around anymore, we should also have enough stability on the ground that we don't need it. So that's kind of the theory. So we'll just orient it a little bit more neatly on the platform. And then we can go down to the ground and we can start looking at how we're going to start the actual structure. You can see I built a little bit farther out from the second landing gear. And now we're going to start the front of the hangar. This capital vessel, all my capital vessels are basically mobile bases. We're going to have all of the guns on it that the game will allow, but we're also going to have everything that we need to do whatever we could possibly need just from the capital vessel, regardless of where we are. So we're going to have the ability to grow food, process the food, process raw materials. We're going to have constructors on board. Everything that you can imagine as being useful on a base will also be on our capital vessel. and the hangar so that we can carry around some of our favorite ships. And in this case, we're trying to learn from some of the mistakes that we made with our previous capital vessel. One of those is only using one of these hangar doors to gain access to the hangar because it wasn't tall enough. We ended up having to attach our small vessel to the back of the ship and drag it with us through hyperspace to the planet because it was too tall to get in the hangar door. By putting the two hangar doors one on top of the other, of course, we double the available space that we can use to get through. And we'll be doing the same thing on the back as well. So this is basically going to be one big hollow tube. You can fly ships in the back and out the front, in the back and out the back, in the front, out the front, whatever you want to do. But we're going to have a little bit of flexibility in how that's going to work. And also, we're going to make sure that we've got enough space to make it actually useful. As far as the front profile, which is what we're going to start working on now, I gave thought to a lot of different potential shapes that we could use. For me, when it comes to a profile like this, things like squares and rectangles just don't really interest me. It's if you've been watching my stuff for the last little while, you know why. It's just it takes a little bit longer and a little bit more time to do more interesting shapes. And I enjoy the process, so that's what we're going to do. And in this case, circle wasn't going to cut it, and definitely triangles. I just couldn't even make it work in my head how we would make that happen. So we're going to go for the ellipse, but we want to make sure that whatever we're doing with this ellipse, it's not just a plain ellipse, and then everything transitions at a 90-degree angle to the sides and the top and the bottom. What I want to do is have an interesting front of the hangar that's got enough detail to say, oh, that's kind of neat, but there's still all the other sections of the ship that we need to build in as well. So we don't have to worry about the hangar itself being a stunner. We just have to have something that's going to be functional with a little bit of detail. And then if we decide later on that it needs more detail, we'll just put more detail. You can see this goes together fairly quickly because the thing with the scaling on capital vessels relative to the other ships is that if we're thinking in terms of how many blocks we're using, the capital vessel doesn't use very many to build something that if you're standing down on the ground with your character looking up is bloody huge. Things go together a little bit faster, but also at the same time, we end up with fewer options to make smooth transitions between the different design elements in a particular build. So that's something that I'm trying to remain aware of as we go. And what I ended up doing after we finished getting that first layer of that profile done was I put a second layer on top of that and then did a bunch of detailing around the edge of that second layer just to make it look a little bit smoother. And I let it sit for a day and I realized I didn't like it. I wanted to do something a little bit more involved. So that's what you're seeing now is rather than show you how I did that second layer and all the edge work, we're just showing you what I decided to go with after I realized I didn't like the second layer with the edge work. And in this case, still maintaining that elliptical profile, but setting ourselves up so that we can have a curved transition all the way around to the sides of the ship. We'll have a 90-degree transition to the top and the bottom, but the sides of the ship is going to have sort of a curved angular mishmash of things going on, and you'll get an idea of what that's going to look like before the end of this episode. I keep trying to use these corner blocks, and I realize that they're very limited in sort of the scope of the areas where you can use them and have it make sense and have it look good. They're still very useful, but in this case, I should learn to just not try stick them in to these sorts of situations where we've got a 22.5-degree angle that's being transitioned to other 22.5-degree angles with compound 22.5-degree angles, and then you try and sit that one little guy in the corner and he just doesn't work. Just can't happen. So you'll be able to see very, very shortly here just how we're going to maintain that elliptical sort of profile, even though it's no longer as smooth and as clearly defined as it was previously. So the next episode, we're going to pick up where we left off here. We're going to work on getting that elliptical profile restored with the angles that we need, and then doing that wrap around to the sides. And once we get the hangar done, or at least primarily done with the structural details and the initial kind of appearances, then we'll worry about the rest of the ship. So if you want to be notified about the next and future videos, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.